Alexander Audio presents Terror on Tap by J. Francis Alexander. Acknowledgements. After the writing is done, an author's file contains a lengthy list of those who contributed significantly to the finished work. This is true of On Tap to the extent mentioning them all would be overweighty in a work of fiction. Those, though, who can't escape due to the depth of indebtedness are Editor Toby Stein, who taught me much and encouraged me more. Eve Oldham, friend and artist, whose painting Look Out in the Midst almost changed the book's title. Talented graphic designer and illustrator Ed Nadebala. Kathy Smith, typist extraordinaire. John Kennedy, whose research on St. Louis went far beyond the normal bounds of friendship. Pete Serodino, whose shipping and barging experience on the Tennessee River lent valuable assistance. Dr. A. Walton Goddard, trusted physician, who kept the book and the author medically fit. Harold Massengill, chemist, so dedicated to the production of quality water for the consuming public, he agonized over some scenes even though knowing they were figments of a writer's imagination. Frances Hare, who knows and treasures intimately her historic old cathedral, was a source of great help, as was Robert J. Bo Sutterth's advice on banking practices. Frank Coulter, of the Fort Lauderdale Water and Sewage Department, also assisted with technical expertise. Anne Pruitt, librarian, who knows her books and her sister, and applauds them both. Tom E. Davis, doting brother, who cared enough not to let me err, and to talented Tracy Barr, who spent hours helping me fine-tune the manuscript. All receive my gratitude. Finally, to Beecher Hunter, whose career as a newspaper editor added immeasurably to On Tap's axiom, and whose sage counsel added immeasurably to its being. Thank you. Prologue, March 23rd, 4:08 p.m., Chattanooga, Tennessee. Marcus Adams was dying. When the pain first began, he hadn't thought too much about the brief spasms of heat where the needle connecting him to the dialysis machine entered his arm, but as the pain became stronger, undeniable, moving up his arms and into his chest, expanding there in ever-widening circles, he could dismiss it no longer. The pain not only commanded his attention, it was seizing control of his mind as well as his body. It was happening so fast. Eleanor, he knew, would never have gone next door if anything were wrong. She was so meticulous about his care. What the nurse in her checked, the daughter in her double-checked. Marcus tried to concentrate, although it was getting harder to think past the pain. He knew what he'd do. He'd lie still a minute, manage his pain, imagine it confined to a box. Then he'd mentally shrink the box until the pain disappeared. It was a trick he'd learned years ago at the VA hospital. He lay absolutely still, focusing on the box until he could feel the sweat from his upper lip at the corner of his mouth. But the box wouldn't shrink. Try as he might, the damned box wouldn't get smaller at all. Instead, it was expanding, engulfing him. He thought of crying out, but he knew Eleanor wouldn't be able to hear him clear across the yard. And crying out when only God could hear him wasn't Marcus's style. God had his own problems, Marcus figured. Besides, he'd always fought his own battles. Learned something along the way, too. Learned when to give a fight everything he had, and when to stick to sparring. Learned when the only sane thing to do was to walk away from a fight altogether. He knew that some men thought their dignity depended on fighting every fight to the finish. Marcus knew his dignity wasn't attached to his extremities. He took a shallow breath now, the only kind he seemed able to manage. He couldn't walk away from this fight, not exactly, but he couldn't win it either. So, his dignity intact, Marcus Adams accepted the pain, and as his spirit flowed into it and mixed with it, the pain no longer seemed a stranger, more like a part of himself he'd never had a reason to get to know real well, and wouldn't now, because the pain and Marcus were, together, beginning to go away. Chapter 1. March 23rd, 4:55 p.m. Chattanooga, Tennessee. The switchboard operator kept urging the Old West clocks on toward 5 o'clock. In what seemed maddeningly slow jumps, the clock had gradually succumbed to her persistence. Now, with just 5 jumps to go, victory was in sight. It had been a bugger of a day. The board had been twinkling like a Christmas tree since 8 o'clock. Water company customers had been calling en masse, and Melinda Denton, who prided herself on her ability to answer calls and channel them to the appropriate party with a high degree of professionalism, was on the cusp of ragged. Why, she wondered for the upteenth time, did customers never call to tell you they appreciated their water service? 99% of the time they had pure water, plenty of pressure, a correctly rendered bill. They called anyway. Recognizing the flaw in her thinking, she knew they called because of that 1% gap, because they had a problem, perceived or otherwise. Besides, if no one called, she wouldn't have a job. She needed her job, but she sure would love to have one complimentary call. In 11 weeks on the switchboard at the Chattanooga Water Company, it hadn't come. Good afternoon, Chattanooga Water Company.
You folks have got to be crazy. My bill says I used 35,000 gallons of water. Lady, that's enough water to fill a swimming pool. You think I got a swimming pool? Hell, lady, I even got a fish bowl.
I'm sorry you're having trouble, sir. Let me connect you to customer service. Good afternoon, the water company.
You cut my water off. You can't cut my water off. I just got home from work and I smell like a pig. How am I gonna take a bath with no water?
Let me connect you to customer service, sir. I'm sure one of our service representatives will be able to help you. Melinda glanced at the West clocks. She hoped someone would be able to help, but at 3 minutes till quitting time, she doubted it. Customer service agents were cleaning off their desks, chatting away, and forming the swell toward the back door. Melinda, though, was stuck in her seat until straight up 5 o'clock. It didn't seem to matter to her boss whether there was anyone in customer service to answer the calls once she put them through. Stop it, she chided herself. No reason to let the day get to you, no matter how hectic it's been. The switchboard for any utility ought to answer calls right up until closing time. After closing, too, she thought, remembering the answering service to which she would switch over before she left the board. When viewed from that perspective, she understood why her supervisor insisted on her staying at her post. It was just that today, Melinda Denton had been pushed. Her natural fatigue at the end of a harried day was aggravated by feelings of guilt because her son was home from school with a cold and she couldn't stay with him. Plus, on the way home, she had to stop and get medicine and groceries. Another hour. Her business and professional women's club met this evening, and her report had to be ready before that, which would take another 30 minutes if she could pull it together easily. Damn it, come on, clock. The switchboard blinked again. Good afternoon, Chattanooga Water Company.
My water looks like milk and smells like bug killer.